Cyberdyne Systems, Terminator online. Scene simulations.
My normal practice is to request screenings without temp music. They probably had temp music, but I don't think I ever heard it. In fact, I know I didn't hear it, and that's another little anecdote, because I would score scenes once I got the film, and then Jim would come in and I'd show him stuff. So then I would work reel by reel, whatever material they would give me. And he wondered why I didn't want to hear the temp track, because I think he had some stuff on there that he liked, and I requested not to listen to it. And when we got down to the love scene, I played him the love scene with this piano theme, you know, this romantic. It gets a little harder as it goes, but still it's featuring solo piano. And he was like, show me that again. And I played it for him again, and he said, I get it now. He said, I understand, because he said, if I had showed you that temp, I had something so totally different in that love scene. I had just almost more action music. It was just really hard still and mechanical, and you might have heard that and never have done this, and yet this brings the whole sort of soul of the film out, the heart of this is about the future. They're making love is going to create the baby. There's a whole soulful story connection with the lovemaking that his temp music didn't do, and that was one of those instances where the music really worked for him because it supported the whole, and it was different than what he had put in that worked with the scene but didn't support the story that much.
It's not quite true that we were turned down by every studio in town, that nobody wanted the film. Some of the larger studios, I remember Paramount specifically, was very interested in the script. People wanted the script. They liked the script. They saw the potential. What they didn't want was me. You know, a director with you know, calling myself a director, first-time director, no credits, or one very questionable credit from which I'd gotten fired, which is arguably worse. But I knew that if I sold it, I'd have money for a year or so to live on, but I would be right back where I started from. And by this point, I had started to really believe in the project and thought that there was real potential there myself. So I held on to it pretty tenaciously. And you know, one of the agreements that Gail and I had going into it was that we wouldn't sell the project, that we would stick together as a team, that I wouldn't do it without her, she wouldn't do it without me, and we would not sell it and allow it to be taken over by third parties. Now, ultimately, that's a harder choice for a producer to make, if you think about it, because there's always room for another producer, but there's never room for a second director. So, you know, I was the one at greater risk. She was the one that had the harder kind of moral dilemma on that. Well, I think that the idea of a cyborg, maybe not exactly as it's shown in Terminator, but the idea of a humanoid robot or some amalgam between cybernetics, mechanics, and organic tissue is inevitable. It's probably going to come from the other direction rather than a machine, kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing, which is what the Terminator was, where the organic portion of it was there as a disguise. That's a pretty far-fetched concept. But I think that it'll come from the other direction, which is that human beings will replace more and more of themselves with artificial alternatives, whether it's because parts are wearing out or because they want enhanced performance or because they want to perform specialized tasks. And eventually I can imagine a human organic brain, which I think is going to be a long way off before we can duplicate that, inside a synthetic body at the bottom of the ocean on Triton, you know, in some distant star system. So I think we're going to be heading that direction, and that won't be a choice that a lot of people are going to want to make, but some people will make that choice.
Special features.
The original shoot of the punk scene, for whatever reasons, the casting didn't quite work. And there wasn't really money in the budget for reshoots. I don't believe that insurance covers bad acting. And Jim decided in that particular case he needed to simply go back and recast and do it over again. So he recast his friends, people that he had worked with, that he knew, that he liked, Bill Paxton, Brian Thompson, and Brad Reardon. And of course it made all the difference in the scene.
I think that for that film, the, quote, synthesizer was the perfect medium. I could get what I needed from it, and that's why I used it. If I don't have the sound, I'll create it with my breathing. The main clank in T1 is a sample of me, you know, I just got really frustrated. I said, I need this sound, and I ran into the kitchen and grabbed a big cast iron frying pan, held it up in front of a mic, and just hit it with a hammer, clank, you know, and it distorted because the technology that I was sampling into had very bad, at that point, the sample rates and the frequency response were really limited. So part of the distortion and the limitation of the technology is part of that signature clank. You know, and it's a really important part of the film. And if I had a beautiful sampler that didn't have the distortion, it probably would have sounded like a frying pan. You know, once it got rolling, I remember at one point being at the dubbing stage and something didn't work for Jim, even after he'd approved it, sometimes on the stage when you mix with the effects, and running home at lunch and screaming into a sampler, literally, for one more sting when the hand comes in the pressing. We'd done all these strings stings, you know, high violins, and we need a new sting because it was like the end, and you know, those were getting old. And it was like, what can I do? What's the scary thing? I said, the human voice shrieking in terror, you know? So I actually, I think myself and the several other people that were around screamed into a microphone, ah, like that. And then I played it, and you know, we put it into a sampling, and I played it on the keyboard in this dissonant notes, you know, and you can hear it, you know, at one of those last times where Sarah almost gets grabbed in the press, you hear this, ah, and it's a sound you've never heard anywhere else in the film before. It's like, so that's it, you know, the memory is like one more level, one more notch, one better, more, you know, just keep driving, you know, that's my main memory.
Languages.
One of my favorite parts of the movie is when I'm leaving the department store and I come running out of the top of the department store and jump off this banister behind this police car and then come running out. And of course, it was the stunt guy that came outside, jumped off the banister, took this 20-foot fall behind the police car. And I was sitting down there. As soon as he landed, I got up and ran off, you know. So Jim was always coming up with stuff like that. But it makes me look pretty good. It makes me look like I did that jump.